All right, Rabbosai, good morning, good morning. Let us begin. I want to begin by thanking our sponsors for this morning's shir. To thank our Talmud Torah sponsors for the month of Sivan, Baruch Meir and Rina Dubin, for dedicating all of the Shirman Drushos this month, and Tzchusa Refuah Shalema for their niece, Chabad Tzipora, Bas Chaya Malka. To thank Shmuley and Libodinovitz for dedicating the Sherman Drushos this month in Tzchusa Ben Aliyah for the Neshama of Harav Peretz Avram, Ben Harav Binyamin Moshe. To thank our Daf Yomi sponsors today, Baruch and Karen Gold, in commemoration of the yahrzeit of Karen's grandmother, Rus Bas Yosef Zichron Livracha. We hope that in the merit of our Talmud Torah, all of the Neshamas will have an Aliyah and the families in Nechama. All right, boss, so we have a lot to do today. Today's daf is Kuf Yud Aleph 111. We are going to pick up, I know, again, Kalman Akiva got onto Kuf Yud Aleph just for the sake of a little bit of additional clarity. Let's just jump back to Kuf Yud Amud Beis 110b at the two dots. Also, I will say this is a packed daf, so what I'm going to actually try to do is we're going to do the first part of the daf a little bit faster because I'd like to be able, the sugi that we're going to be able to really sink our teeth into a little bit more is on the last Mishnah and Gemara on Amud Beis. So a lot to do today, Baruch Hashem, and we're also going to see some very interesting halacha l'maisa. I mean, I don't know how l'maisa the halacha is, but when I say halacha l'maisa, we'll see how the Rambam comes out in a number of these sugis as well. So again, going back to Kuf Yud Amud Beis 110b at the two dots, kitana v'chareshes. It's 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 11 lines up from the bottom. So just to reorient ourselves a little bit, we had the Mishnah. And remember again, our topic is the situation of a man who is married to two different women with two different levels of status. Now again, specifically in this particular case we're going to be focusing on now is Arishah from the Mishnah. The Mishnah says, Kitana v'chareshes, if a man is married to a Kitana v'chareshes, and ultimately again he dies. So now again you have a case of a Kitana v'chareshes that fall to a Kitana, remember again a minor, chareshes deaf mute, falling to the Yavam, to the surviving brother, or for Yibum. So the Mishnah says, Ein bia achos mehen poteres tsarasa. So remember again, Yibum or Chalitza with one of these women does not impact the Zika of the other woman. I will say, remember again, just to solidify this, Yevamos 101 is what? No idea, right? That's right, but right. But Yevamos 101 is that halacha when you have a man who's married to multiple wives and he dies, and the we'll call it the cohort falls in Yibum to Yibum, we generally assume that all you need to do is take action with one of the women. And once something is done with one of the women, then by definition the rest of the cohort is covered. What we're being introduced now to that is that is true as long as what? All of the women in the cohort, in the marital cohort, enjoy the same halachic status. But once you have a situation where the women have different statuses in halacha, so what you do with one is not going to take care of the zika of the other. That's the overarching principle over here. So a man is married to a kitana and a chareshes. Then I both say, the truth is, although often, remember again, Kitana and Chareshes, we often always assume are what? In the same category, right? Forget about Yevamos for just a second, right? To both say, who do we always group together? Cheresh, Shot, and Cotton, right? Cheresh, Chashu, Cheresh, Shot, and Cotton. So we automatically assume that these individuals are always grouped together. What the Gemara is introducing us into what the Mishnah is introducing into is that for the sake of Yibum, these women are not treated the same. And now we'll see why. So we'll say, Vaharaya, again, one more time, then we'll get into this. A man is married to a Chareshes and a Kitana. Reuven's married to a Chareshes and a Kitana. Reuven dies. Chareshes Kitana fall to Shimon, the surviving brother for Yibum. So whatever Shimon does with one is not going to take care of the zeka of the other. Good. Let's analyze. Amr Rav Nachman. Amr Rav Nachman again. Ashkechasi Rav Barava. Ol Rav Chano Chasnei. Diyasvi de kamakavu akvasa b'shuka de pompadisa. So Rabbi says a very beautiful Gemara. So Rav Nachman, the introduction is beautiful. Rav Nachman says, I found Rav Ada bar Ava and Rav Chana, his son-in-law. And what were they doing? They were sitting and they were asking questions. They were pondering questions in the marketplace of Pumbedisa. Look at Rashi. Umekavak Vaser, right across in Rashi. Makilim Talmidim Svivam, Shayu Boim Lishmoa Divrehem. So we'll say a beautiful, beautiful image. Just also a beautiful image of a father-in-law and son-in-law creating a meaningful relationship based on Torah. We'll say, there's so much to be learned sometimes from not just from the halach of the Gemara, but the Gemara teaches us so many different things in nuanced ways. We'll say, one of the most complicated relationships in life is in-law relationships. They're complicated. And a lot of times what happens is, especially again with in-laws, in-law parents, right? Baruch Hashem, a person marries off a child, Mazel Tov, now you have a son-in-law, you have a daughter-in-law. So sometimes I think people make the mistake, like people like to say, my son-in-law is like my son. Now, you might love your son-in-law like your son, but Lamaisa, he's not your son. Baruch Hashem, he has a father, he has a mother, and you might love him like a son. He might not love you like a father, right? So I will say, but the incredible part is, that's why it's so important to create relationships that are rooted in something that is profound and meaningful. When a father-in-law and a son-in-law create a relationship around Torah, so, I have my father, but we create a commonality. We create a bond that unites us. And the truth is, it's such a profound way to create, in general, meaningful life relationships. Relationships that are rooted in something eternal. Relationships that there's a bond, there's a Torah bond there. Whether we're close, we're not close, it's almost irrelevant. There's a relationship that exists, and the relationship stems from something that is so profoundly beautiful. So I look at this Gemara. Look at this matter. So Rav Ada bar Ava is sitting there ultimately again with his father-in-law. Rav Ada bar Ava sitting with his son-in-law, Rav Chana. And they're learning Torah. They're learning Torah in the marketplace of Pobedisa. V'amri, hadisnan ketana v'chareshes, ein bias achos mehen poteres sarasa. When we say that if again Reuven dies, he leaves behind a wife who's a ketana and a chareshes, and we said in the Mishnah that bia with one of them does not go ahead and take care of the other. So an interesting qualification. Hanimili dinaflala me'achav pikeach. So Rabbi say this is talking about a case. When do we say that if Shimon does yibam or chalitza with one of the women, the katana or the chareshes, it doesn't take care of the other? That's when Reuven, the deceased brother, was a pikeach. Was a pikeach. Delo yadinan ibikatana nechalei ibichareshes nechalei. Rabbi say, what's the problem? This is fascinating. What's the problem? Because we don't know which wife Reuven had the stronger affinity towards. Did he have the stronger connection or affinity towards the ketana? Because Rabbi say, remember again, one day the ketana right now is an age issue. But one day the ketana will grow up and he'll have a normal marriage with the ketana. Or on the other end, the chareshes, although she might be a chareshes, she's already a gedola, and there is the ability for a physical relationship or a meaningful physical relationship now. So I will say, aval nafla me'echav cheresh, but if Reuven himself was a cheresh, vaday bechareshes nechali. Ultimately, again, we assume that Reuven had the stronger connection, ultimately, again, with his cheresh wife. Why? The bas biyahi. Number one, because they can have a physical relationship. And number two, ubas minehi. Obviously, again, they're the same. They're not the same. In other words, they're the same in that they both have the same physical handicap. But Lamaisa, again, there's more commonality between them. So Rabbi say, so now, it's a fascinating qualification. Rabbi say, but what you begin to see over here is something amazing, which is that chareshes and ketana, as much as up until we got to this sugya, we assume that halachically they're the same. It turns out that they're not. And even in the nature of their marriage, they're not. Rabbi say, remember again, just look at it through this lens. Ketana, as much as she cannot affect marriage, she can have marriage affected on her behalf. What kind of marriage? Doraisa d'Rabbanan? Both, right? It depends who's affecting it on her behalf, right? If her father does it, it's Doraisa. Mother, brother, because the father's dead. Ultimately, again, d'Rabbanan. So a ketana herself is in a different marriage framework. A chareshes, Rabbi say, at most, what kind of marriage does she have? Right, Rabbanon. We'll get into this by the Maseches Kiddushin. We're going to talk about the ability for a chareshes to be married at most is a drabanan. Now again, I will point out that contemporarily, I don't know who I was talking about this last week. We were speaking about cheresh. Greg was talking. So again, I want to point out that obviously the halachos of cheresh chareshes are so dramatically different today, Baruch Hashem, because of the advances that we have. But again, from the Gemara's perspective, so I just want to point out that's why the Gemara that's why halacha doesn't treat them the same. So it comes along. Rav Nachman, I said to them, no. It's not true. It's not true. Even if Reuven, the deceased brother, was a cheresh, we're still not sure. It's fascinating. What are we not sure about? Who did he have the greater level of marital affinity towards? Keitza Takanasan. Not Misava Keitza Takanasan. So Rav Nachman comes along and says, the truth is, it doesn't make a difference whether Reuven, the deceased brother, was a cheresh or was a pikeach. Either way, we're not sure how to handle these women. So Gemara says, so therefore, Keitza Takanasan. So what should we do? Okay, we'll say, so now we know we have a problem. We'll say, another good musar. It is easy in life to highlight the problems with any given situation. Those two words are the most important words. Keitza takanasan. So how are we going to deal with it? What's the takana? Keitza takanasan. Here we go. Here's what you should do. Go ahead, marry the chareshes, and then divorce her. And ultimately, in the kitana, wait till she becomes an adult, and then do chalitza with her. That's the suggestion. Rashi says over here, Konis esachareshes umotzia beget, the chalitzas kitana tifsal la aleha. Because also remember again, if you do chalitza with the kitana, ultimately again it will passel the chareshes. So marry the chareshes, then divorce her, and wait until the kitana goes ahead and becomes old enough that you could do chalitza. That's how you remedy both of these women. Rav says, what do you see from here? Kasava Rav, this is incredible. Chareshes kinuya umishiyares, kitana kinuya ve'ena kinuya. They both say, this is a fascinating formulation. So Rav Chisda says, what do you see from here? You see from here that Rav says that chareshes and kitana really enjoy two different statuses, two different levels of status. A chareshes is kinuya and mishiyares, which means what Rabbi saying? She's acquired, in other words, that her marital bond is there, but what? It's not complete. Versus a kitana, which is what? Kinuya ve'ena kinuya, which means what Rabbi say? A safek. Now, here's what's fascinating. Going back to last week's Gemara also, why is a kitana looked at as safek? Right? See, the kitana always has the nuclear option. What's her nuclear option? Miyun. Right? So because of that, the way we look, and by the way, you remember we saw this, that as much as Kiddushay Kitana ultimately, again, is looked at as marriage, it's not looked at as complete marriage. V'haraya, if it was complete marriage, what would you need for the dissolution? What would you need? A get. The fact that you could just dissolve it, ultimately, again, through miyun, indicates to us that it is not a complete relationship. So again, a chareshes is a full relationship. And that's based on the fact that this is her status and it's not going to change. So it's a relationship, kinuya umishiyeres, but there's always a piece that is missing. There's always a piece that's absent. Versus kitana is kinuya ve'ena kinuya. These chareshes kinuya ve'ena kinuya. Kitana kinuya misheres, as if you would think it was just the opposite. That chareshes is kinuya ve'ena kinuya. That ultimately, maybe chareshes is the case of Safek, and maybe kitana is acquired, but there's a part of her that's not fully vested in the marriage. Amai kone simutzia beget. Then ultimately, again, why do you go ahead? For the case of the chareshes, why marry her and divorce her? Top of Kuf Yud Aleph, Teisiv Gabe B'manav Shach. Let her stay with the husband. Because halacha l'maisa, if you say that she was indeed married to the first husband, so hakinuyihi, then she should be fully married to the other as well. V'lo kinuyihi, and if she's not fully married to the first husband, then what? Ha-nachris ba'almahi. They both say, then if there was no real marriage to the first husband, then guess what? There's no yibum or chalitza either. To which the Gemara says, "V'chitema If that's the case, then perhaps you'll say, why does the Kitana have to wait till she becomes a Gedola and then do Chalitza? Teisiv Gabe, let her stay with the husband. Because again, I can make the same argument. If she was really married to husband number one, then what? Then she should really be vested with Yavam as well. Ilav kinuyahi, and if she wasn't really married to husband number one, nochrisa ba'almahi. Then ultimately, again, when it comes to the Ibum situation, she has no connection, no relation, and there should be no obligation to do anything. To which the Gemara says, Imkein chareshes b'matipuk. If that's the case, ultimately, again, how is the chareshes remedied? How is she able to leave this situation? Therefore, Amr Rav Sheshes, hachinami mistabra. Seif Rabbi said the Gemara wants to suggest over here that really what Rav Chisda said in the name of Rav would really be the appropriate way to remedy this situation. Marry the Chareshes, then divorce her, and ultimately again wait till the Kitana becomes a Gedola and do Chalitza with her. This is how you remedy this case of the two wives, the Chareshes and the Kitana. This seems to be clear, or this seems to be true. Two brothers were married to two sisters who were Yisomos. Now remember again, when we talk about Yisomos, who are we talking about? It's about girls, right? Kitanos who don't have a father, right? And therefore, again, the way they were married off was through a brother or a mother, which means we're talking about dirabanan marriage. So shnei achin esuin, shtei achayos kitanos, shtei achayos Yisomos. Kitana v'chareshes. Now, we'll say one of them is a kitana, right? One of them is a chareshes. So meis bailo shel kitana chareshes. So now watch this. So let's say the husband of the kitana died, right? The husband of the kitana died. So Rabbi says, so now what happens? So now the kitana falls to the surviving brother who is married to the chareshes. So what do we do in a situation like this? Chareshes yotze beget. So ultimately, again, the chareshes, he should divorce the chareshes wife. Kitana tamtin ad shetagdil v'tachlots. The kitana, wait till she becomes an adult and then do chalitza. Meis baila shel chareshes. What happens if the husband of the chareshes dies? Then, Rabbi says, in this case again, the chareshes is falling to yibum. Kitana yotze beget. Ultimately, again, the kitana is divorced of the get. The chareshes asura the olam, and the chareshes remains asura the olam. V'imbala chareshes. And if he has relations with the chareshes, no same law get v'hutra. Ultimately, again, he gives her a get, and then she's permitted to remain with him, or I should say, permitted to remarry. The Gemara says, the fact that the Brisa sets it up this way shows us something amazing. So Rabbi say, this is the construct that the Gemara is working with over here. The construct is that Ketana and Chareshes enjoy two different levels of rabbinic marriage. Namely what? That Chareshes is Kinuya u'mishuyeres, which means what? She is fully married. No. She's married, but there's but I don't want to say partial. In other words, she's fully married, but there's a part of her that can't vest in the marriage. In other words, so it's as complete of a marriage as a chareshes is going to enjoy. The nature of marriage for chareshes is by definition, it's 100% for her, which on the normative marital scale is 100% less something. So I know I'll think of a tighter formulation for this. Let's say, but that's what it means. In other words, she's fully vested in the marriage, but the marriage itself is not a fully vested one. Right? So ultimately, again, kinuya mushiyares. She's vested, but there's a part of her that remains unmarried or not fully acquired. Kitana, kinuya ve'ene kinuya. Both say kitana rather is treated a little bit more almost like what? Like a suffix. Like a suffix marriage. So the Gemara says, if you look at their marital constructs respectively, as the way we just articulated, Mishumachi, that's why the Chibala Chareshes no sin lo get v'hutra. That's why ultimately if he has relations with the Chareshes and then gives her a get, ultimately again she is permitted. The Amrit Manavshach, Iketana kinuyahi hanafke mishum achosisha. Because what they say the following: if Kitana is truly acquired, then what? Then the Chareshes will go out. Why? Because of achos isha. Because let's remember again, the case over here that we just quoted in the Brisa was the case of two brothers married to two sisters. So if the Ketana, and again, both Yevamos, both again minors, one a Ketana, one a Chareshes. So the Gemara says, if you say that Ketana is Kinuyahi, then ultimately again, Had Nafka Mishum Achos Isha, first wide line, Kufir Aleph Amud Aleph. Then what? Then ultimately again, the Chareshes wife goes free without anything because of Achos Isha. Ilav Kinuya, and ultimately if the Ketana is not really acquired as a wife, Shaper Miyavim, then ultimately again, Yibum should be able to take place. But if you say the opposite, that Chareshes is Kinuya ve'ena Kinuya, maybe Chareshes is the Safek, and ultimately again Ketana is fully married to but there's a part of her that remains outside of the marriage. If that's the case, Ki ba'al Chareshes amai nosein get v'hutra. When he has relations with the Chareshes and then gives her a get, why is she permitted? Havile bia psula, it should be a bia psula, or bia psula lo patra. And Abba say, as we know, we've learned before that a bia psula does not exempt a woman from a chalitza. To which the Gemara says, no. Maybe we'll bring in something else. Here, Hamani, Rabbi Nechemia hi da'amar bia psula potaras mechalitza. Maybe the Brisa is reflecting the opinion of Rabbi Nechemia. Rabbi Nechemia is the opinion who holds that even a bia chalitza, even a bia psula will go ahead and exempt a woman from chalitza. To which the Gemara says that can't be, because Rabbi Nechemia ema seifa. Look at the end of the Brisa. Misha hayan nasui shtei yisomos. Ketana v'chareshes, someone who was married to two Yevamos, one a Ketana, one a Chareshes, umeis, and then he died. And what happened? Uba yavam ala Ketana v'chazru b'ala Chareshes, and ultimately, we're going to see this actually in the next Mishnah. And ultimately, again, the Yavam had relations with the Ketana, and then on the Chareshes, o sheba echev ala Chareshes, or ultimately, again, the Yavam had relations with the Ketana, and another brother had relations with the Chareshes, ne'esru shtehen alav. Ultimately, again, they are both aser. Keitzat takan aser. So how do you remedy the situation? Chareshes yoses beget. So the chareshes goes out with the get. Uktana tamtin ad shetagdil v'tachlots. And the ktana wait until she becomes an adult and then do chalitza. So again, says the Gemara, I amit bishlama chareshes kinuya umushuyares ketana kinuya ve'ina kinuya. So we'll say if you're that a chareshes is married, fully married, but except for the part of her that remains outside of the marital acquisition. But a ketana, her status is more one of safek. V'rabanan hi da'amri mishumachi tamtin ashetag devatechlotz. Ultimately, you're going to say, and it makes sense that it's the Rabbanon who said that Allah Lamaisa, she should go in and wait, or I should say the Brisa says that she should wait until she gets older, or you should wait until she gets older and do chalitza. Why? The Dilma Kadim Uba'al Chareshes Beresha, because maybe we're concerned that the Yavam will have relations with the Chareshes first. The Havile Bia Diktana Bia Psula, and then the Bia with the Ketana will be a Bia Psula. So we'll say that makes sense. If you're going to bring Rabbi Nechemia into this, Eli Amrit Rabbi Nechemia. Ha'amra bia psula pantra. Ultimately, Rabbi Nechemia says bia psula is fine. Bia psula will still go ahead and exempt the Yevama from any further chalitza. Ela shmamina rabbanani shmamina. Rather, Rabbi said we see from here that this brisa and our sugi is going in accordance with the Rabbanon, not like Rabbi Nechemia, namely that a bia psula does not take care of chalitza. The truth is, you could even see it from the Reisha. How so? Diktani in Baal Chareshes no sin la get v'hutra. If he has relations with the Chareshes, he gives her a get and she's permitted. V'lo katani in Baal Ketana no sin la get v'hutra. And ultimately, again, it doesn't say the reverse case. If he had relations with the Ketana, that he gives her a get and she's permitted. So Rabbi said that's also a raya that we reject the premise of Rabbi Nechemia that a bia psula exempts you from chalitza, and this reflecting the view of the Rabbanon. Imishum ha lo irya. That's not a good raya. I'll tell you why. Chareshes de lesle takanta de hetera, katani takanta de isura. Rabbi say ultimately again the chareshes, where I don't really have a remedy that would allow her to marry any man that she wants. Ultimately, again, we will provide a secondary remedy. We call takanta di isura. Again, takanta di isura is the best we could do. Allow her to get older and do chalitza, which of course will preclude her from going and marrying a kohen. But Lamai says the best remedy we have. Kitana di isle The isle takanta, but ultimately again, but the ketana where we do have a takana de'atera, lo tani takanta di isura. Ultimately again, but the ketana where we do have a permissible remedy, ultimately again, we don't provide a secondary remedy. Good, I will say, what's the takeaway from the sugya? What's the takeaway from the sugya? So I will say, so just to highlight and to concretize what we have over here. So first of all, I will say, leaving aside this last piece, because the Gemara threw in Rabbi Nechemia, we've seen Rabbi Nechemia extensively throughout this Masechta about if there is a bia psula, what does bia psula do legabe chalitza? So that's an ongoing machlokes throughout the Masechta between Rabbi Nechemia and the Rabbanan. The overarching theme of this particular section over here is the nature of the distinction between the marriage of a ketana versus a chalutza. So we'll say, so the Rambam has a very interesting formulation on this. So the Rambam in Hilchos Yibum v'Chalitza, Perek Hey Halacha Chavdal. And I both say, here's your takeaway, right? Again, Baruch Hashem, we have a lot of visitors today. The way we try to approach some of these sugyas in Yevamos is Emir Hashem again to try to distill a complicated sugya down to one nugget. I'm absolutely confident that everyone's memorizing the Shakla of Ataria every single day of the daf. In case I'm not, so in case you're like me and you're not, here's the nugget. Here's the nugget to walk away with. Parakeh Halacha Chavdal. I'll send it out on the WhatsApp chat later because actually the truth is, I will say, I'll send this out later on in the chat. But it's a good maramakom. Parakeh, it's really halachos Chavdalid through Lamed are all of these sugyas. So listen to this. Haisa achas chareshes va'achas kitana. Here it is. Ruvain is married to two women. One is a chareshes, one is a kitana. Again, chareshes deaf mute, kitana minor. Ruvain dies. Two women fall to Shimon. Shimon now is faced with one question, which is, well, many questions, right? But what's going on over here, right? What do I do now? So listen to this. Number one, ein bia achas men poteres sarasa. So I will say, so number one, and this is very important. Number one, they are not looked at as a unified marital cohort. Because the only time that multiple wives are looked at as a marital cohort is when they have the same status. And that, I will say, is one of the most important takeaways. So that's why, again, up until now, whenever we have had marital cohorts, so we'll say that's why, again, going back to Yevamos Daf Beis, when you have women that have the same halachic status, and one of those women is an erva to the Yavam, what's the halacha? They're all pturos. Why? Because again, when you're part of the cohort, whatever happens to one impacts everyone. So I will say, so step number one is that a chareshes and a kitana are not part of the same marital cohort. Why? Because they enjoy two different levels of marriage. Okay, so that's number one. Number two, says Rambam, okay, so what should we do? V'keitza takanasan. What should we do? So I will say, so listen to this. So here's the Rambam throws in, and here's where he's drawing from the next Mishnah, but I just want to read it to you now. He says, Ketzat Takanasan, Milam Dinis Haketana Shetima'in. Oh, the Rambam comes along and says, hey. By the way, the Ravid, I just want to point out, the Ravid jumps on him, something fierce. But again, you look at it on your own. Ketzat Takanasan, the Rambam says, tell the minor to do miyun. Now, Abba say, I know what you're thinking. I know exactly what you're thinking, right? We just had a whole sugya on Erev Shabbos that we don't teach miyun. Oh, but you remember the end of that sugya? What's the answer to that? We teach miyun when? We encourage miyun when? When? B'makom mitzvah. So in other words, when I needed to facilitate a mitzvah, then I could encourage miyun. So the Rambam says, tell the minor, the kones is sachareshes. So it's simple. Simple, says the Rambam. Tell the ketana to do minabosai. By the way, you're asking, I know what you're thinking to yourself. That wasn't even mentioned as an option here at all. It's going to be next Mishnah. First of all, it was mentioned as Rabbi Eliezer. We've seen already before. We're going to see it the next sugya, but I wanted to close this out here. So what happens? Tell the ketana to do miyun. The konis is acharashas. Marry the charashas. V'imrotza legarsha kosev laget achar sheyavo aleha v'tusa lazar. Now, so the idea over here is, see, here's the problem. You could go ahead and tell the kitana to do miyun, and that kind of just removes her from the picture. Now, with the chareshes, here's the problem. You really only have one option on the table, which is yibum. You can't do chalitz with the chareshes. Why can't you do chalitz with the chareshes? Right? Chalitz requires das. So here's what's interesting. With the chareshes, you're stuck. You're stuck. So there's Yibum, and the Rambam says, now again, could you divorce a chareshes? You can't divorce a chareshes. Now, both say, it's interesting to think about how exactly you could divorce a chareshes if after all what? You need das for a get. Okay, that's a gittin sugyo. We'll deal with that when we get to that, right? But the Rambam says again, Abba say, it says interesting. This is the way to remedy. It says the Rambam, teach the ketana to do miyun, remove her, chareshes. Again, hope if you could build a nice life with her, fantastic. But if not, do yibum, and then ultimately again divorce her. Now the Rambam says, both say, hold on to your coffee for this one. The Tusar Lazar. The Rambam says, after you divorce the chareshes, ultimately again she is psula lekahuna and only permitted to a non-Kohen. This is where the Ravid jumps on this. Her status to the kahuna is quite a fascinating one. But again, you look at that on your own. So we'll say that's how the Rambam remedies this sugya. When Ruvain dies and ultimately again married to a kitana and the chareshes, tell the Rambam to do miyun, marry the chareshes. If you want to do yibum with the chareshes, you want to stay married to her. If not, divorce her. Good. Both said the Gemara goes weiter. Look at the bottom of Kuf Yud Aleph Amud Aleph. Have a great day. Says the Mishnah. Misha haya nasui l'shtei, right? So let's see, here we go. Misha haya nasui l'shtei yisomos kitanos. So both say, here we go. Another case. Ruvain married to two minor girls, right? So he married two kitanos, both yisomos. So married off by their mother or their brother. Okay. So what's the halacha? Umeis. Now Ruvain dies. Uba yavam. So I will say now. So Ruvain dies. These two women now fall to Shimon. Umeis yavam ala rishona v'chazer uba ala shniya. And ultimately, everybody say. So what happens? Ruvain dies, and now they both fall to Shimon. So uba yavam ala rishona v'chazer uba ala shniya. So I'll say, so what happens? So Shimon has relations with the first one, and then ultimately has relations with the second one. Oh, Sheba Achiv Alashnia. Or I will say Ruvain has relations with Ketana number one, and ultimately again Levi, another brother, has relations with Ketana number two. So we'll say, what's that? Lo pasas harishona. Ultimately, again, the fact that either Shimon or another brother had relations with the second wife does not invalidate the marriage, or in this case, the yibum, ultimately to the first. Take a look at Rashi for just a moment. Top Rashi and Kuf Yud Aleph Amud Beis. Rashi says, "Lo pasas harishona shari bi'asan shave," because ultimately, again, their bia is the same. Meaning what? V'irishona knuya harihi ishto v'achrona biasnos. V'lav knuya hi harishtehan nachrios etzlo shelo haise knuya la'achiv u'makaymes harishona shelo nifselu alav. So this is very interesting. So the Gemara says, let's illustrate this with Shimon himself, because I think it's the most stark way to illustrate this. So again, Reuven is married to two women, both Yisomos. Reuven dies, both of the women fall to Shimon for Yibum. Shimon has relations with Ketana number one, and then has relations with Ketana number two. So our first reaction is, right? That's the first reaction. Like, what's going on over here? So Rabbi says, see, here's what's interesting. So the Gemara says, look, here's what we know, is that right now Shimon did Yibum with Ketana number one. That relationship is intact. The fact that he had relations with Ketana number two, that does not impact his Yibum performed with Ketana number one. Why not? B'manavshach, because the Rashi explains, we'll see this in the Gemara, because halacha l'maisa, if we say that ultimately, again, the relations with the Ketana is a true act of Yibum, then ultimately, again, the fact that he had relations with a second Ketana doesn't change the fact that Yibum was performed. If, on the other hand, we say that the relations with the Ketana is meaningless, then ultimately, again, the same way that Ketana number one was meaningless, then what? Ketana number two is meaningless. In other words, either way you look at it, whatever was solidified and concretized with number one does not change after relations with number two. The same would apply, by the way, if the two women in question weren't Ketanos, but ultimately were Charashos. Ketana v'chareshes. What happens if one is a Ketana, one is a Chareshes? So ba Yavam ala Ketana v'chazro bala Chareshes. So we'll say if the Yavam has relations with the Ketana, then has relations with the Chareshes. O sheba achiv ala Chareshes. Or I will say it's not Shimon who has relations with both of them, but rather Shimon has relations ultimately again with the Ketana. And let's say again Levi has relations with the Chareshes. Pasal Saketana. Ultimately, again, I will say in this case, halacha l'maisa, Halacha l'maisa, the ketana herself becomes pasul. Rashi says over here, pasul seketana mishum gzeira dilma kadum ubal chareshes bereisha. I will say out of concern in a case where, let's say, would have had relations with the chareshes first. Ukidamar b'gimara afagav demarash. So we'll see this in the Gemara. Ba yavam ala chareshes v'chazra b'ala ketana. We'll say what happens if the yavam has relations with the chareshes and then has relations with the ketana. Oh, sheba achiv ala ketana. Or I will say for that matter, it wasn't the same yavam, but another one of the brothers who has relations with the ketana. In this case, ultimately again, pasal sachareshes. He invalidates the chareshes. Pikachos v'chareshes. So I will say what happens again. Now two wives. One of them is a chareshes. One of them is a pikachos. One of them is a chareshes. So I will say pikachos means a typical, normal, healthy person, right? And one of them is a chareshes. Ba yavam ala pikachos v'chazar b'ala chareshes. Oshe ba'achav ala chareshes lo pasal es hapikachas. So I will say this is an easier case. Why is this an easier case? I will say why. Because I will say in this case you have a typical woman. So I will say in this case, once one of the brothers had relations with the pikachos, then what I will say? We're done. Now again, remember, we're not delving into the world of Isser right now. We're not talking about what Isurim would have been violated with relations with another wife or with another brother. We're not getting into that. What we're getting into, I will say, is now status. So the Gemara says, Lo pasal sapikachas, ba yav malacharesh chazar bala pikachas. What happens if the reverse? Let's say the Yavam first has relations with the Chareshes, and then with the Pikachos. O Sheba Echav Achiv Ala Pikachos. Or Rabosai, Yavam number one has relations with the Chareshes, and then has relations with the Pikachos. Or Yavam number one has relations with the Chareshes, and Yavam number two has relations with the Pikachos. Pasal as Chareshes. I will say in this case, ultimately, again, you'll pass the chareshes. Gidola ukitana. What happens? Interesting. What happens, I will say, if one of the wives is a gidola, one of them is a kitana. So, ba yavam ala gidola v'chazra b'ala kitana. If he had relations with the gidola, then had relations with the kitana. Oshe ba echav ala kitana. Or one yavam has relations with the gidola, second yavam with the kitana. La pasla sagidola. So, I will say, that's like the case of pikachas and chareshes. In other words, once there is bia happening with what we'll call a typical regular woman, so I will say, so then we're done, right? That shuts down the process, and any subsequent bios are not going to affect change in status. However, ba yavam ala kitana, the chazar uba la gidola, oshe ba'achiv ala gidola, pasla sakitana. But I will say, halacha l'maisa, if the Yavam first had relations with the Kitana and then the Gidola, or another brother had relations with the Gidola, ultimately, again, this will passel the Kitana. Rabbi Lazar Omer, Melamdin es ha-Kitana shatayin. Rabbi say, here it is. Now, by the way, you see where the Rambam pulled this from. Rabbi Eliezer is changed, I believe. I think we changed it before the Bach changed it. Okay, we'll go here. I don't see the change. Okay, Rabbi Lazar. Rabbi Lazar holds that whenever you have a Kitana involved, what do we tell the Kitana to do? Do miyun. I will say, by the way, so again, which makes sense in these scenarios, because in these situations where you have complicated marriages, to put it mildly, so I will say what we're telling them with Kitana is, be masalik yourself, because if you remove yourself from the picture, it just makes the rest of the picture a bit more manageable. So as Rabbi Elazar comes along at the end of this Mishnah and says, halacha l'maisa, we teach the Kitana to do miyun. So I will say, so again, when I quoted to you from the Rambam, Hilchos Yibum, Perek Hey, Halacha Dalid, and the Rambam spoke about the case of the Kitana and the Chareshes in the previous Mishnah, and the Rambam said, just tell the Kitana to do miyun. And we are wondering, Rambam, but no one ever brought up miyun in this entire discussion. The good news is the Rambam always learns ahead, right? So I will say, so the Rambam saw the next Mishnah a bit ahead of us, saw the position of Rabbi Elazar, and again, the Rambam incorporated that into the previous sugya as well. And I will say it's going to be incredibly important. So the Shitas HaRambam is, whenever you have these complicated marital circles, right, and Lamaisa, one of the women involved is a Kitana, miyun. Trigger miyun. We don't like miyun, right? The Gemara in Erev Shabbos said, miyun was one of the things we tried to stay away from. Okay, but it's different over here. Why? What do we call this? Miyun b'makom mitzvah. So we'll say, let's see the Gemara. Says the Gemara, Amar Rabbi Yehuda Amar Shmuel, halacha Rabbi Elazar. The halacha was Rabbi Elazar. That I will say, whenever you have a kitana situation, ultimately tell her to do miyun. So we'll say, this is Rabbi Yehuda named Shmuel. V'chein Amar Rabbi Elazar. Rabbi Elazar also said, the halacha follows Rabbi Elazar. We'll say, look at Rashi. Now, what's going on over here? Right? It's always good to be your own cheerleader, right? I say, no, different Rabbi Lazar says the Gemara. Look at Rashi. V'chinam Rabbi Lazar ben Pidas. I will say the Rabbi Lazar that the Gemara is quoting is the Amora Rabbi Lazar ben Pidas. Rashi says ben Pidas the Amorahu halacha Rabbi Lazar de Masnisin v'hu Rabbi Lazar ben Shamua. Rabbi Lazar ben Shamua. So Rabbi says, so again, so now you have two things happening over here. You have Rav Yehuda saying the name of Shmuel, that the halacha follows Rabbi Lazar, the Tana in our Mishnah, and Rabbi Lazar ben Shamua, Rabbi Lazar ben Pedas, the Amora, also saying that the halacha follows the Tana, Rabbi Lazar ben Shamua in our Mishnah. We'll say, by the way, I'll point, yeah, okay, let's go back there. Says the Gemara, we'll say, it was interesting, I just want to point out something fascinating, is in some of the earlier Girsaos of the Mishnah, if you remember again, the Rabbi Lazar who was advocating for Miyun was changed to who? Rabbi Eliezer, which some put that as Rabbi Eliezer ben Hyrcanus as well. So it could be that there are a couple of just different Tanoim ultimately who hold this, or again, just different, just fascinating to see. So the Gemara says as follows, Utzricha, and I will say, here's the Shaila. I got it. The halacha follows Rabbi Lazar. Got it. Why do I need? We will say, but now this has been stated in more than one place. So why do I need it to be stated everywhere? So I will say, now look at Rashi. Sigmar says Utzricha. Before I get to Rashi, Di itmar bahak hamaisa. If you would have said it in the earlier case, I will say, what's the earlier case we're referring to? Erev Shabbos. I will say, look at Rashi. Di itmar b'kamaisa gabe achayos mishum dakati lo akayim mitzvas yibum hilchach malamdinas agetana ishto l'mayin. I will say, this was the case of the sisters. I will say, remember this case? Reuven and Shimon are married to sisters. Right? You remember, Reuven is married to the Gedola. Shimon is married to the Ketana. What happens? Reuven dies. Remember this is fascinating. Reuven dies. So now Reuven's wife, who's the Gedola, falls to Yibum to Shimon. Could Shimon do Yibum? Right? Could Shimon do Yibum? The quick answer is no. Why not? Achos Ishto. Shabbos, remember you have like this dramatic, overwhelming clash. What's the dramatic, overwhelming clash? Shimon has a rabbinic marriage to his wife and has a biblical obligation to Yibum, to his sister-in-law. So again, what did Rabbi Lazar say in that case? Melamdin osa, right? We tell Shimon's wife, do miyun. Because if she does miyun, then Shimon could go ahead and perform biblical yibum. It was such an incredible case. So the Gemara says, so now, we already said that halacha follows Rabbi Lazar. We already said it. So if we already said it over there, why do you have to say it over here? To which the Gemara says, I'll tell you why. The Gemara says, Di'it mar b'ha kamaisa, b'ha kamash malacha Rabbi Lazar, mishum l'lakim mitzvas yibum. Rabbi said that was different, because in the previous case that we saw before, on Kuf Tes, so the Yavam had not yet performed the mitzvah of Yibum. But here in our case, where technically he already performed Yibum, perhaps the Chareshas, Ema tarvaihu lefko beget. Perhaps again, Lamaisi should just be motzi bodim with the get. V'yashmarina baha, and we're just said in this case, Mishum the Gedola Ramya Kameh, because ultimately again the Gedola is before Idach lo, but in the previous other case not, therefore tzricha. So we'll say Saloch Lamaisi, the Gemara says the cases are dissimilar. The cases are dissimilar enough to warrant a statement that the halacha follows Rabbi Lazar in both cases. And I will say, indeed, again, I don't mean to keep reverting back, but halacha Lamaisa, that's how the Rambam paskins, that in any case where you have a ketana involved, we will teach the ketana to do miyun. If she is misalik herself from this scenario, it just makes life much easier. I will point out, and again, like I said, I'll send this all out in the chat, but the Rambam discusses each of these cases. Again, we're not going to go through them now just because of time. The Rambam discusses each of these cases and how he paskin halacha l'maisa. I will say last Mishnah for the day. Here we go. This is, it's all been fascinating up until now. This is even more fascinating. Yavam sheba al Yevama kitana. Yavam katan sheba Yavam kitana. We'll say fascinating case. Reuven is married to Rachel. Rachel is a kitana. What happens? Reuven dies. Reuven has a surviving brother, Shimon. Shimon is a katan. What ends up happening? Shimon does yibum with Rachel. So it's Yavam Katan Sheba al Yavama Kitana. What's the halacha? Yigadlu zeh im zeh. They grow up together. They both say, it's good to get married young. You mature. You mature a lot. I say, Baruch Hashem, I met my wife when I was 19 years old. I got married when I was 20. The best thing, Baruch Hashem, that ever happened to me. Because the truth is, Baruch Hashem, my wife saved me from a lot of life mistakes. So again, okay, we didn't exactly meet in this situation, but Lamaisa again, right? So Yavam Katan Shaval Yavam Kitana. So you got this was incredible. So look, essentially, what is the Mishnah saying? Ultimately, again, Halacha Lamaisa, there's Yibum. That's the bottom line over here. The bottom line is, a Yavam Katan who married a Yevama Kitana, ultimately, again, they did Yibum. It works. Yegadlu zeh im zeh. Which, by the way, also, just so you should know, look, the Mishnah is teaching you. Do you know what the secret to successful Jewish marriage is? Yegadlu zeh im zeh. I will say that's what marriage is. Marriage is growing together. Doesn't have to be growing in the same way. And I would tell you, it doesn't even have to be growing at the same pace. It just has to be a husband and a wife who are growing together. That is a successful marriage. Yigadlu zeh im zeh. Ba'al Yevam Gedola. Now what happens? Interestingly enough, Reuven dies, leaves behind Rachel. Rachel, in this case, is an adult woman. She's an adult. But Shimon the Yavam, is a minor. So what happened? Ba'al Yevam Gedola. So I will say, if Shimon, the minor Yavam, has relations with the Yevama, so the Yibam works Tigadlenu. And I will say, Tigadlenu literally means she raises him, right? Which happens in many regular marriages as well, right? That ultimately, again, I thought I was married. I heard from many, I thought I was marrying an adult man. I thought I was, right? Lamaisa turned out a little bit differently. Okay, I'll raise him as well. Tigadlenu. And I will say, the bottom line that the Mishnah is trying to highlight is what? That ultimately Yibum with a katan works. That's the takeaway over here. So whether they're both kitanim, or even if the woman is a gedola and the yavam is a katan, it works. Watch this. These incredible cases. Yevama. I will say, by the way, we're now, just so you understand, we're now veering a little bit away from like the complicated multiple person marriage situations to just more concrete cases. I know that's a significant disappointment for many of you. Right? I'm going to show you. I'll put out some charts just for the heck of it a little bit later on. It says this: watch this. Let's say the brother-in-law says, okay, we'll say, now this is a regular case. Adults, right? I know it's hard to believe. No complications, right? Reuven died. He was an adult. Married to Rachel. She was an adult. Shimon's an adult, right? So what happens now? Shimon has to do Yibum with Rachel. It's good. I'm going to do Yibum. I don't want to do Yibum. I'm going to do Yibum. Rachel comes along and she says, Shimon has not consummated Yibum. Remember again, Yibum is Bia. That's what Yibum is. So she comes within 30 days and she says, there's not been Bia. What's that halacha? Kofin oso shetachlotza. Now, both sides, what we're going to see over here is something very interesting. If you look at Rashi, I'm hesitant to do Rashi because it's like a shtickle, like spoiler alert with Rashi, because the build up to this is very interesting. But Rashi says over here, actually, no, we're not. Oh, fine, we'll do it. Look at Rashi. Hayvam shar b'soch shloshim yom shekinsa yavam lo nivalti lo liyavam. The get yav min yotze mitachas yada kim lefarsh v'gimara v'u omer ba'alticha v'dayecha beget. Okay, so actually the case is actually a bit more complicated. So I will say, he says, we did have relations, and I gave you a get. And here's the get. So I will say, see, he's claiming, you don't need chalitza, because I gave you a get. She's saying, ultimately, again, there was never bia. So it's nice you gave me a get. I will say, what does a get do in a yibum scenario? Not totally true. What does a get do in a yibum scenario? It precludes yibum. Right? So in other words, once the Yavam gives the Yevama a get, that shuts the door to Yibum. But it's not Chalitza. So Rashi says over here, it's fascinating. So she's showing up in Beis Din, and she's saying, it's within 30 days, this Yibum was never consummated. He's saying, yes, it was, and I gave you a get. She's saying, very nice, you gave me a get. There was no Bia. So what do we do in that situation? We force him to do Chalitza. The achar shloshim yom. So I will say, what happens if she shows up in Beis Din after 30 days? After 30 days, same claim. Bia never occurred. He gave me this document, but I still need chalitza. He's claiming Bia did occur, and I gave you a get. What's the halacha? Mevakshin heimena sheyachlotz. Interesting. After 30 days, we ask him to do chalitza. Rabbi will say, what's the chilik between within 30 days and after 30 days? Look at Rashi. Liachar lamin yom, hu ne'eman de lo mokim inish anav shemi libo. See, Rabbi will say, it's interesting. We assume that a man could live with a woman for up to 30 days and not be intimate with her. But Lamaisa, after 30 days, there's no way they weren't intimate together. Rabbi will say, so again, I want to point out, she's not making any other, in other words, if she claims other things, maybe he's not, whatever it is, that's a different set of halachas. But assuming it's a normative situation, so the halacha says, we don't believe her, essentially. Not that we don't believe her, circumstances are such that if a man and woman are living under the same roof, within 30 days, maybe they could be absent. But Lamais, again, more than 30 days, there must have been an intimate relationship. So I will say, but nevertheless, what will we say to the guy? You should do chalitza. Why not? Why not? Right? We'll set it up for you. Right? We'll serve food. You always have to have refreshments. Right? We'll have refreshments. Right? We'll make it a matzuv, as they say, and it'll be fine. It'll be fine. Right? But we can't. What's interesting is we can't force him. Again, we'll get into this in Gemara. So Gemara says, "Ubizman shu modeh." They'll say, but here a different case. What if he's modeh? He says, "You're right. Right? We didn't have relations." Then I will say, so I will say, in that case, if he's modeh, then even after 12 months, ultimately, again, we force him to do chalitza. So I will say, all of this is where he's contesting her claim. If he admits we never had relations, then Lamaisigan will force him to do chalitza. Weiter. We'll say another fascinating case. Fascinating. I will say, here's the case. Right? Reuben is married to Rachel. Right? And she has a brother, and Reuben has a brother, Shimon. Rachel gets into a fight with Shimon. The Bible says Reuben is alive. Rachel gets into a fight with Shimon. I'm just illustrating the case. It doesn't have to be this case. And what does she do? She makes a neder, precluding herself from getting any benefit from Shimon. She makes a neder. Then what happens? Right? A week later, Reuben dies. Oh, now we've got a problem. What's our problem? So Rabbi say, technically speaking, so there's a mitzvah of Yibum Daraisa, but Rachel made a neder precluding herself getting any benefit from her brother-in-law. So what do we do with this? Kolfin oso sheyachlotzla. Ultimately, again, we force Shimon to do chalitza. The Gemara says, however, the achar misas baila. We'll say, now watch this. If Reuven dies, and after Reuven's death, Rachel makes a neder prohibiting herself from getting any benefits from Shimon. Then I will say, what does this look like now? This looks like a very smart woman who does not want to do yibum with her brother-in-law. Right? So I will say, so ultimately, again, so in that case, mevakshin heimeno sheyachlotzla. We ask Shimon to do chalitza. We can't compel him, but we ask him. I will say, here's what's happening over here. When she makes the neder during her husband's lifetime, we assume that there's no ulterior motive to bypass yibum. And therefore, again, we honor the neder, and therefore we will force the yavam to do chalitza. When the neder is made after the death of the husband, the problem is it looks like we're trying to bypass yibum. So I will say, in that case, we're much more reticent to force the yavam. Again, I will say, in general, remember, we've seen this concept that when the yavam and the yevamos show up to Beis Din, what's the first thing Beis Din does? Miyatzin also. We pull the yavam to the side. And if we think that this shidduch is a bad idea, we encourage him to do chalitza. We'll say, chances are, if your potential wife is making a neder not to get any benefit from you, this is not a match made in heaven, right? In other words, this is probably not a good idea. So therefore, again, I will say, so here's what's interesting. We're not going to force the yavam to go out and do chalitza. Why are we not going to force? Because Rabbi say, we're going to see why, but we're very nervous to allow this type of subversion of the system. We're very nervous to allow that. That being said, halacha l'maisa, we're going to encourage him, strongly encourage him to do chalitza, because obviously this woman, or at least potentially, this woman does not really want to marry you. Let's go back. But I will say, if she says, Hineni muchana muzuman, I am taking a neder, so that what? When my husband, even when her husband is alive, when my husband dies, right, I'm taking a neder, Shimon, I will never, for the rest of my life, get any benefit from you. Someone says, Rachel, why are you making such a neder? Because even if my husband dies, I do not want to do yibum with this guy. Mevakshim and a shachal. So both say, so in other words, if she plays her hand and she says, the reason I'm making this neder is because I don't want to do yibum, then halacha l'maisa, in that case, we don't compel the yavam to do yibum, to do chalitza, but we ask him to do chalitza. So Rabbi say, you begin to see, and we'll see this more in the Gemara, but you begin to see a halachic hesitancy that when we see that she's using the mechanism of neder to bypass yibum and to force chalitza, there's a halachic discomfort with that. So if she just makes a neder, and it happens to work out that her neder bypasses chalitza, fine, we're going to honor the neder, make the yavam do chalitza. But if there seems to be a premeditation to go ahead and use the mechanism of neder to bypass yibum and force chalitza, we're not comfortable with that. Why we're not comfortable with that, we're going to see. But that being said, even though we're not comfortable with it, we see that she clearly does not want to marry this guy, doesn't want to do yibum with this guy, and therefore we won't force him, but we're going to strongly encourage her. Rabbi say just 2 lines, then we're going to stop. Says the Gemara, Yevamos, he's still Rabbi Meir. Rabbi say, let's go back. How did this all start? Riveting Mishnah started with the ability of kitanim to affect yibum. So even if a yavam katan does yibum with a yavama kitana, it works. And the lashon of the Mishnah was yigadlu zemzeh, right? They'll grow up together. Not only that, even if a yavam katan does yibum with what? With a gedola, with an adult woman, halach l'maaseh, it works as well. Says the Gemara, our Mishnah must not reflect the view of Rabbi Meir. What does Rabbi Meir say? Disanya katan ukitana locholza l'msam. The Rabbi Meir. But Rabbi Meir holds that halach l'maaseh, a katan and a kitana cannot do yibum. They can't do yibum and they can't do chalitza. They're both saying that why not? Rabbi Meir has a very good reason. Look at Rashi. Locholza l'miyadmin katan shema yimsa sris kitana shema timsa ailenis. So Rabbi says ve'enam b'nei yibum nimtzu pogin be'erva. Rabbi says incredible. Rabbi Meir says, how can you allow a katan and a katan and a kitana to do yibum? Or Rabbi say, by the way, remember, yibum and chalitza are 2 sides of the same coin. We already seen this. So wherever there's going to be yibum, there's chalitza. So once you say you can't do yibum, you can't do chalitza either. Why can't they do yibum? Rabbi say, because they're ketanim. Maybe what? Maybe she's going to be an islandess, incapable of having children. Maybe he's going to be a sris, incapable of having children. And Rabbi say, if we know that a woman is an islandess, or the surviving brother, the Yevama is an islandess, or the Yavam is a sris, what's the halacha? So what's the halacha? Nothing. By the way, no yibum or chalitza. There's nothing. Because the whole point of the yibum relationship is lahakim zera la'achiv, to create progeny for the deceased brother. So if you're a sris, so Rabbi Meir says, kitanim, nothing doing. Right? You can't go ahead and do yibum. And by definition, if you can't do yibum, what else can't you do? Chalitza. It's 2 sides of the same coin. So the Gemara just says, by the way, our Mishnah clearly does not reflect the view of Rabbi Meir. To which the Gemara says, maybe not. All right, to Rabbi Meir, I feel it's in Rabbi Meir. Could be even Rabbi Meir. It's the first white line. Ki kam Rabbi Meir, gedola lekatan, ukitana legadol, dechad minayhu bia di isurahu. So Rabbi say, it could be that when does Rabbi Meir say that there's a problem with the katan and kitana? When one of the parties is an adult. See, Rabbi say, when one of the parties is an adult, see, Rabbi say, I just want to point out, I left out the last piece of Rashi. The problem also is, also remember again, if a brother-in-law and sister-in-law marry each other, and it's not under the umbrella of yibum, then what is it? It's a little thing that we call arayas, right? So Rabbi Meir says you can't allow this for a katan and a kitana because lemaisa, again, you're treading, right? You're wading into the arayas waters. To which the Gemara says maybe not. Maybe where does Rabbi Meir have a problem? Kigam Rabbi Meir, gedola lekatan, the kitana legadol. So the chad minayhu bia di isurahu. So Rabbi say ultimately, again, interestingly enough, maybe Rabbi Meir only holds the problem is when one of the parties is an adult. Because when one of the parties is an adult, and therefore again a bar or a bas onshin, someone with halachic liability, that's when there's a problem. Because then if you're doing yibum with a katan or a kitana, and you're an adult man or an adult woman, then you are being pogea and possible erva. That's possible. However, aval katan habal kitana detarvayo ki adadininu lo amar. But ultimately, and perhaps halacha l'maisa, when they're both kitana, maybe there's not a problem. Because Rabbi say again, when there's no kitanim, when they're both kitanim, then what Rabbi say? In reality, then what? There's no liability. But again, the Mishnah also brought down the case of Gidola who had relations with her Yavam who is a Katan, and then it said Tigad Lenu, they could remain married. Rabbi Chanina Choza Ba Shaini. So ultimately, again, I will say the Gemara says it's different. That's referring to a case ex post facto, where they did it already. Maybe lechatchila halacha lemaisa. If the yavam is a katan and the yavam is a gedolah, we would say don't affect such a yibam. Wait. So the Gemara says, but ex post facto, okay, they could remain together. I v'ha tigad lenu kamar. I will say that tigad lenu means they could continue to live together. They could continue to have bia. So it sounds like again the Mishnah is sanctioning this relationship. To which the Gemara says, "V'ha tigad lenu kamar techol bia u'biadi suru elo." Rather, the Gemara says, you're right. Better approach is just to simply say, our Mishnah does not reflect the view of Rabbi Meir. So Rabbi Meir is on record as saying, whenever you have a katan or a kitana involved, whether they're both kitanim or just one of the parties is a katan or a kitana, ultimately, again, we do nothing. We wait until they reach the age of majority, then they could perform either Yibum or Chalitza. Our Mishnah clearly rejects that view and allows ultimately, again, for Yibum between a Katan and a Kitana, or for that matter, between a Katan and a Gedola, or ultimately, again, a Gadol and a Kitana. Now, we'll stop over for today. Tremendous Yashikach. We covered a lot of ground. I know a little bit quickly. Incredible Yashikach. Beautiful, beautiful sugi ahead of us tomorrow. Shkoyach. Cover on Zoom. Have a great day, everyone. Great to see everyone.